money in the bank. He's got gas in the tank, you know what I mean? That's right, you're looking at the man. Now, I'm something you could never be.
Hello.
Hello, Antiqua. Didn't see you there. How you doing, people? Hope you're well.
How you doing?
Yeah, big shout outs. We've got Kern Roden. What's happening? Dylan Liverpool, Fair Maiden. Viking Dude, Vinnie Sullivan. What's happening? Ed the Ball. What's going on, Geezer? Cricket, Sean Wilson. Angela, how you doing, Gorge? Reality Report in the house. Diamond Dan. Englishman.
Vito.
Right, Elephant, what's happening? Vito, Big V, what's going on, bruv? I'm going to make you an admin. There we go. I've made a few people admins, so just keep your eyes out for the pricks and all that. And let me introduce you to Paul Golding, leader of Britain First and a ripperologist, as it goes. There are layers to this fight. How you doing, Paul? You good?
Brilliant, yeah. Just making the most of the lockdown. Been a lot of sleeping, exercising, relaxing, working on the laptop. There's bugger all else we can do.
Yeah, I know. It's been a nightmare for me. I'm normally out and about, constant and active and all that, and I've just been sitting in, finding myself watching fucking Paw Patrol, finding out what's going to happen if they save the dolphins or not. You know, that kind of shit. Kids running about.
Yeah, man.
Not much else you can do but muck in with them, you know, getting involved. But yeah, I've been doing that as well, keeping exercising. That's the important thing, people. You know that. Just get yourselves doing half-hour intense exercise a day. Even if you watch that soppy bastard Joe Wicks on YouTube and you just do his workout.
Is that the long-haired Essex boy?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's funny, man.
Yeah, I ended up doing a couple of his exercises because he does PE with Joe. And I had the kids there and I was like, right, kids, stand in a fucking line. We're doing it, you know, and I went for it. And apart from his shout outs and boasting about how many million people's watching him, it's all right. You just sort of get stuck.
It seemed all right. He just seemed fucked as like anyone else at the end of it. He was just laying on the floor at one point.
Yeah.
It's
jumping
hard. About
it's
like
hard.
a kangaroo.
Prancing around fucking kangaroo proper takes it out of you when you're 15 stone. It's it's not well. But right, now we've got a few people in here. What's happening to Agis? Ashley Simon, what's going on? Mr. Wilson, how you doing?
Admin up, Ashley, by the way.
Yeah, admin up, Ashley. That's
Drop
for
her a
sure.
little,
I must say at this point that Ashley Simon has had at least 7 Jack the Ripper tours around Whitechapel.
Oh, I'm jealous, actually. You're lucky.
Yeah, I need
lucky.
some of that, man. I need some of that.
Yeah, we're going to have to do it one day. Once all this bollocks is over, we'll have to go and do it. That'd be good.
Well, as soon as someone like Sam Cochran, our head of security, who lives in Belfast, as soon as he comes over, he's very interested in this subject because it is the biggest British crime mystery in our history. So you've got people such as Jeff Miles, our Eastern Regional Organiser, a head of security, Sam Cochran. People from all around the country, as soon as they're within striking distance of London, they want the famous Paul Golding Jack the Ripper tour around Whitechapel. And trust me, I am not welcome in Whitechapel. I am public enemy number 1 in Whitechapel.
We'll get you a disguise, bruv. I'll just knock you up some of my clobber and we'll go down there like as if we're part of the furniture, you know?
But yeah, so we're not welcome in Whitechapel. But poor Ashley, every time someone comes over, she'll always gets dragged along on the Jack the Ripper tours around Whitechapel.
Good. I'm jealous. I'm honestly jealous.
Yeah, I need some of that, man.
Typical woman, she'll hate it because you like it.
Well, two weekends ago, Luke, before the lockdown, a few weekends ago, I promised you Jack the Ripper tour, didn't I, of Whitechapel? And then the coronavirus lockdown hit us like a freight train. But I promise you, as soon as we're out of this, you and your brother, I'll be more than happy to take you around Whitechapel and give you the full unblemished story, where every single murder took place, but also places of note You know, you've obviously know about the Ten Bells pub, but other places where Jack the Ripper dropped a bloody apron, the only clue in the whole case. I'll take you to where that was dropped because I only figured that out myself recently. I knew it was on Galston Street, but I didn't know exactly where.
Where the graffiti was, right?
That's
right.
it. Yep,
All
I
right.
only found that out a few months ago, so I'm still, you know, I've got to the point now where there's literally nothing more I can read, watch, or figure out about this entire issue, and it's interested me ever since I was a young boy. When I was a young boy, I used to read Jack the Ripper history books and that. But it was about 4 years ago that I just, for some reason, I just ended up getting re-interested in the whole subject because it's got such magnetism, the whole issue.
The pinnacle of murder mystery, isn't it? Like, I mean, that's it. Apart from fiction and like Sherlock Holmes and stuff like that, I mean, when it comes to reality, Jack the Ripper is the pinnacle.
Yeah, I thought he solved it.
well before they even coined the phrase serial. Well before that, like it's, you know, this was it when they realised there's people out there that are doing these.
Watching, yeah.
I think there's only two murderers that I know, and the two serial killers that I know about that have remained undiscovered. I think that's the Zodiac killer in America, but the most famous of all is Jack the Ripper, and it's part of London's folklore. It's part of London's history, and generation after generation after generation all know about this. You know, it's not something that's faded away with time. This is the ultimate global murder mystery, and it fascinates everyone.
Yeah, in a weird way, as sick as it was, it kind of put East London on the map, you know, because East London, what was East London? It was like the slum of London. It was the roughest part. It was where we had the most immigration. We had Jewish Russian immigrants there flooding the areas, and there was a lot of tension. Like
there was English, Irish, and Jewish in the East End in big numbers. But there's only certain things that the East End are famous for, and that's Jack the Ripper, the Blitz, and the Cray Twins.
Uncaged. Uncaged.
Oh yeah, Brothers Uncaged up and come.
I'm part of East London folklore now.
But you know, this whole subject, you're wearing that stupid hat tonight, and I'm pretty sure if you could have done, you would have worn the matching cape and had a bag with you. That is all 100% historical nonsense. That is because we've never. Well, the thing what you got to start off at is that Jack the Ripper was an completely ordinary man from the East End who blended in with the East London crowds, who slipped up and through alleys and walked down roads completely inconspicuous. He wasn't. If anyone would have been walking around London at the height of that crisis in the autumn of 1888, dressed like you then you would have been mobbed. You would have been lynched straight away. You wouldn't have got 2 foot. But the problem we have with this entire case is that there's so much historical fabrication, distortion, and legend and myth that's built up around this, and that's understandable because everyone's got a theory. Everyone's written a book. Everyone's come up with their own suspect. But what you need to remember is no one knows who Jack the Ripper was. And the reason that no one knows who he was, no one. And the fact of the matter is we are 130 years away from the Autumn of Terror now. And 99% of the evidence has all been destroyed or lost or it's just been lost in the ether of history. So all we can do at this point is create the most compelling circumstantial case against the subject, not an evidential or DNA or forensic case against anyone, because there's no evidence left. All we can do is build up the best circumstantial, who is the most likely, this person.
Who was his first victim? Tell us who his first victim was.
Well, the first.
I know there was 5, right?
All right. Okay.
Right, first, this is another level of crap because there was one of the top policemen, McNaughton, Inspector McNaughton, said that there was only 5 victims of Jack the Ripper. No, there wasn't. There was a lot more. But you got to understand, first of all, You need to think of the standard of policing in 1888 at the height of the Victorian era. The standard of policing was absolutely terrible. You had the most legendary policeman involved in this whole legend is Inspector Frederick Aberline. And you've probably all seen the film From Hell. He was the one Johnny Depp played in that film.
That was pretty good, yeah.
The problem is
Ripper Street as well. Ripper Street. If anyone's ever watched that, it's okay. It's not great, but
I didn't get into it.
Into that, yeah.
The problem is he was leading the inquiry, the police inquiry on the ground, and the person leading it in the office back at Scotland Yard was Inspector Swanson. So between Inspector Swanson and Aberline, the problem we have is that standard of policing was abysmal back then, which has led to, which in my opinion contributed massively to not catching him in the first place. So you had people like Frederick Aberline, who's the number one, the top, the most legendary policeman involved in the whole Jack the Ripper saga. So Aberline was, in my opinion, utterly useless. For example, his favourite suspect was a guy called George Chapman or Sleveran Klosowski, who was the Polish barber. And he worked in the basement of the White Hart. If you go along Whitechapel High Street, you've got a very, very old pub from the 1700s next to, it's called Gunthorpe Street at the moment in modern days, but it was called George Yard back then. And it was the alley where the first Jack the Ripper killing took place. And at the end of that alley, right on the high street, is the White Hart. And you might know about it from the living in the East End itself. The White Hart pub, he lived. So Aberline's top suspect was a barber who worked as a barber underneath the White Hart pub. The problem is that Sleveran Klosowski, or George Chapman was his anglicised name, he was hanged about a decade later for poisoning his wives. And Inspector Aberline said that if a man is evil enough to poison his wives, then he's evil enough to be Jack the Ripper. Well, now, any modern police, exactly, look, but that's the standard of policing we had in the Victorian era. It was abysmal. It was terrible.
I mean, when it comes to those sort of killers, which we know nowadays, thanks to FBI techniques and criminal profiling and shit like that, is serial killers do normally have a pattern. They tend to stick to it. It worked the first time, I'm going to do that again. Like BTK, like fucking Zodiac Killer, like the Son of Sam, any of them, they all sort of stuck to the same way of doing it. It worked the first.
He'd have butchered his fucking wives, wouldn't he? He wouldn't have poisoned them.
That's what I mean. It would have been stabbed stuff. Why would he change to poisoning?
Exactly. Look, every killer has got a modus operandi. If you go from ripping open the abdomens of women and taking away their internal organs and causing massive mutilations, to go from that
to basic poisoning,
to poisoning of your wife is just ludicrous. So
it's not basic enough. It's not personal enough. That's very, sort of, you put a bit of poison down in their dinner, let them eat it, and do it over a couple of days and end up dying.
You're not going to go from total mutilation to poisoning and get the same satisfaction.
Yeah,
no way.
Because all serial killers are addicts. They're like an addict is addicted to heroin. They need their fix. Jack the Ripper needed his fix of mutilation. And that's why you get if you go from the first Jack the Ripper killing all the way to the last, you see progression in the intensity of mutilation. So as a drug, if you're a drug addict, you need bigger and bigger doses to get the same buzz.
Yeah.
The last one was his worst one, wasn't it? It was that girl in the bedroom because he had time. He took his time and he proper dissected the corpse and cut her boobs off, cut her eyelids off,
I'm sure Paul's going to say that wasn't his last one.
It wasn't his last one. It wasn't.
I knew it.
He's schooling me. I like it.
Look at it logically, yeah?
Yeah.
If you're a mad serial killer on that level,
Leo, go upstairs.
And you've got that type of addiction, would you stop? Would you just one day get out of bed and think, I'm not going to do that anymore, I don't need to?
Did he die? Did he move? We'll get to that.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But no, what you got to remember is the standard of policing was abysmal in Victorian times, and because they had no, you got to understand, before Jack the Ripper, there was hardly any serial killers throughout British history. It was just.
Would I be safe to say that most people that became policemen were hard men, like boxers, ex-boxers?
Yeah, policemen in Victorian England were tough and tall and big and strong. They weren't. Yeah. You go out now, and I've been arrested by some police women and some police men who
you couldn't get away from.
Couldn't run 10 yards, and I could overpower with one hand tied behind my back. It's ludicrous these days. Back then, you imagine they were big, strong, healthy, men who were capable of subduing anyone.
Thugs a lot of the time. There was, he's a big lad. We'll have him. He can be on the beat. Right, here's your beat. You patrol them streets. I'm fucking around. You give them a clump. That was it. Really, you were there to intimidate and to collect money and other things, and just sort of.
Let me just ask you one question, Paul. So Fiagis says it's an interesting subject. What documentaries or films or whatever, what would you recommend as one that points to the right direction?
We'll come to that. One thing at a time.
Sweet. Yeah. I thought I'd ask, otherwise I'll forget.
But the reason there's two reasons there's so much legend and so much myth surrounding this whole Jack the Ripper thing is because, one, the policemen at the time were inept and they come up with strange suspects and strange theories themselves, which were just nonsense. They've all been rubbished by modern. But back then, they didn't have the experience of what motivates a serial killer, psychological profiling, geo profiling, area profiling. They didn't have the
madness and stuff like that. It was like, oh, he's mad. That's it. And they left it at that, wasn't it? It was, you were locked up.
Of course. And unless you had, like, if you look at the newspaper reports from the time, unless you had a madman who is foaming at the mouth and crazed walking down the streets of Whitechapel, no one would have thought anything different, because that was the idea that they was pushing. If you'd done this to someone, you had to be a monster, not an ordinary man who's seriously ill in the head, but you had to be a monster.
They had people called alienists back then. Alienists, that's what they called them, and they would be the ones that would profile these mad bastards and put it down to either the devil. They were possessed. Basically, they were possessed, they were mad, or they were lunatics. So it was because of the full moon, it would send their brains, which ain't too far from the truth, apparently. Apparently, the moon can fuck with your brain, the water in there. Apparently, that's one theory I looked at. But they had people...
Someone just asked there in the questions, Luke, why was he called Jack the Ripper? Now, this is an interesting thing, because I only found this out 6 months ago or so. In English culture, you have the name Jack. So you have Jack the Lad, Jack of all trades.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And at that time, you had Jack the Ripper, because the victims...
Go on, I've got it. Yeah, right. Fucking hell.
Makes sense. Yeah. So it was just a typical term, and they just put Ripper.
I'm the bollocks. Yeah,
everyone would agree, Luke, that you're a classic Jack the Lad.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So that's where in English culture we've got that, Jack the Lad, Jack of all trades, all that kind of stuff. So that was the reason it's called Jack the Ripper, and it stuck.
Yeah. Was that something he come up with himself? Or was that something the press dubbed him beforehand? Because I know he did letters, didn't he? Jack the Ripper. It's been
completely debunked that the Dear Boss letter, the letter that starts Dear Boss, which is, again, we say, you're right, Governor, and all that kind of stuff these days. Back then they used to say, all right, boss, how you doing, boss? So the letter that starts Dear Boss, the famous one that ends with the name Jack the Ripper, was written by a journalist, and I haven't got the details with me, but there's actually a documentary about this.
That's considered the only one that's real as well, isn't it?
No, the only one I believe is real is the Mr. Lusk letter, which was accompanied by half a kidney.
Yeah.
Yeah. The kidney they did examinations on it, and it was the kidney, whoever it's from, had Bright's disease. So they looked at Catherine Eddowes, who was the victim that died before that arrived, and she had Bright's disease as well, and she was missing a kidney.
Fuck.
So you can be 75% certain that the George Lusk was the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, which is basically a group of vigilantes that went out and augmented the police by patrolling the streets.
Can you imagine being sent a human kidney? Like, there is a killer out there. There's some, and they know where the fuck you operate. They send you a kidney. Can you imagine the fucking...
it's got to send some shivers down your fucking spine, isn't it?
The terror you would feel opening that and seeing a wrapped up
Paul, wouldn't
kidney.
the writing on that as well, like a bit, like
crappy?
The letter, pointed towards him being a bit...
The letter's very creepy because it's addressed from hell. Yeah. And that has always, whenever I look at that, that always freaks me out because you're dealing there, you're looking there, you've got a glimpse into the pure evil that we're dealing with in this case. It's quite frightening. From hell, you can just imagine you can imagine what the kind of mindset of Jack, the true Jack the Ripper, when he wrote that from hell. You know, who would write a letter from hell and then go out and do all the things he did? So it's quite scary. From if you're I'm a Christian, so I treat all these moral things with quite a lot of I
think a lot of people are desensitized nowadays, aren't they?
Yeah. But it is quite scary, for someone to actually have done that to all those people and to write letters from hell. He had to be a seriously unhinged and disturbed person. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, it's like he's comfortable. He's comfortable knowing that, like, he's fucking demonic. Like, it sits right with him. He's like, yeah, I'm all right with that.
Yeah.
It's nothing to him. You got to understand when someone is a psychopath as well. Like, they do these tests on them in the FBI and things like that, and especially like there's a lot of serial killers that were volunteers. I mean, what was his name? Edmund Kemper was a real help to the FBI because he was so open to volunteer to do stuff, and they put them through these tests, hook them up to these machines to measure their blood pressure, their heartbeats, and their brain activities, and they show them clippings of, like, say, like a glass of milk, then a butterfly, then kids playing in the park, then a dead body, then a loaf of bread. And they wouldn't have any reaction to seeing, like, someone like me would see a dead body and it would make you like, oh, like it does something to you, your heart skips a beat, as they say. With them, it's the same as looking at, someone doing their shopping, or it's nothing. It's like it makes no difference to their mood or to their brain activity at all. And you're like, oh mate, that's
pure psychopaths and pure sociopaths, 100%. Yeah, completely switched off to other people. Yeah,
it's completely selfish, like completely, utterly selfish. All they care about is what's going on with them. That's it.
Jack set the bar for everything else as well, didn't he? He set the bar for a lot of fucking serial killers. We were talking about Zodiac, weren't we? Would you say that he's a copycat?
They all wanted to emulate him. Yeah, they all wanted to emulate, like, a lot of them. Not all. I'm saying all, but I shouldn't say all. A lot of them would always mention him, like, in interviews and stuff like that, and be like, I mean, the chess piece killer in Russia, I think he was dead set on, like, beating this record or some bullshit. I don't know. And he was, wanted to emulate that. He wanted that notoriety. They thrive on it. It's,
the thing is, if you look at, say, the Yorkshire Ripper went out into, quite sparsely populated or, population areas where it's like a middle level population, and it's, the Yorkshire area, and he spread out across a large area. You're talking with Jack the Ripper, someone who stayed within the same 2 square miles in an area that was massively overpopulated. You talk about the streets and alleys were packed with people. Yeah. And not only that, there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of undercover detectives, plainclothes policemen, and also policemen walking the beat. Not to mention every single person is on high alert. And he went right into the middle of that, under their noses, and just managed to kill multiple victims. Mm-hmm. It's astonishing how he got away with it. And you've been to Whitechapel, Luke. I've been to Whitechapel dozens of times. And it's packed at the moment. If you walk around and think, if I tried to murder someone in this type of area, you're just going to get caught. It's probably the worst place to do it.
You know what I mean? You might get away with, I don't know, smashing their head in with an hammer or something, and you not mutilate them, and to take organs and do the things he did. It's like, fucking, what's the chance? you know. So what's the royalty angle? Where the fuck did that come from?
Do you know what? I knew this was going to come up. There is no royalty angle. It's nonsense. It's crap. So I think we should just discard that and move on. It's the biggest myth. Because basically, the Hollywood film From Hell with Johnny Depp, that focuses on what's called the Royal Conspiracy, and that is the biggest load of rubbish you'll ever come across. It was the Freemasons, and it was all ritual, and it was all carried out by a special branch. And all. It's absolute crap.
He got away with it because he got in a horse and carriage and got away. He was disguised, like he was in a carriage, so he could.
Well, that's chucked out as like a theory of how he could have done it because they just can't work it out, right? They just can't work out how the fuck he got away.
Great.
The reason he got away is coming back to the scientific principle, Occam's razor. What is more likely? What is the simplest explanation? The simplest explanation is that he was a man who was completely ordinary and just if you walk past him on a street, you wouldn't think twice. And it's just a completely ordinary man. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't an aristocrat, a gentleman walking around in a cape and a top hat like Luke's got.
You see, now this is going to be interesting because it's like, how the hell did he have the surgical precision and know what he's doing?
He didn't. And actually, there was multiple police surgeons, right? And we'll talk about this in a minute. There was a police surgeon for the Whitechapel district for the Metropolitan Police, and if you go down past Aldgate, then you go into the City of London Police, who had their own police surgeon. So Bagster Phillips, who was the police surgeon for the Met in that area, said that he and it's only him. It was a passing comment. It must have had medical knowledge, but everyone else. From the modern times now, who's investigated, because remember they produced morgue reports, post-mortem reports, and you had people like Sir Thomas Bond, who was the police surgeon for the City of London. They've all concluded this was just mutilation. This was not surgical. This was not medical. This was not anything. This was more akin to slaughtering an animal and ripping it to shreds. It was completely random. If you look at the wounds on a victim like Catherine Eddowes, you can see on her abdomen just the pure jagged frenzy, and on her face was ripped to shreds, and it was just a complete random.
This is so weird because like a lot of people, have been told this. So it's like there's so much misinformation out there.
Yeah, constant. That's probably why he got away with it so long.
Because that was a royalty link, right? They had a link to royalty because of how could he have known the surgical, and had the surgical ability and all that, and that was like the royal angle. And
that royal conspiracy is nothing more than a myth, just as like Robin Hood or King Arthur and Camelot. They're myths. They didn't just pure myth and legend. And the reason that you have myths and legends growing up around a subject is in the absence of concrete evidence. And we don't know categorically who Jack the Ripper was. He's completely unknown. All we can come up with is what is the best circumstantial police case that you can take to a court of law.
Well, that's how a modern detective works. Oh, have we gone?
No, he's still there. He's still there.
All right, it broke up for a bit, but that's what we do now in like modern policing, modern detectives. They work by deductions. I mean, what's the most likely scenario? A husband is killed, so the first logical person would be the beneficiary of his money. It would be the wife. You go to the wife first, right? And that's with the press back in that day. What they didn't do, it was all romanticized. It was all, he must be this dark figure in a top hat, and they went with the most romantic, the whole, so I say it, but like Hollywood spiel, like what's the most glorious thing it could be, when it could have just been a normal geezer walking about plain clothes. There's nothing out of the ordinary about him. He's a type of geezer you would see talking to a prostitute. So
every day, all day in Whitechapel, in the Whitechapel of 1888, all day, every day, disgusting, dirty men were talking to prostitutes. There were 1,200 prostitutes estimated working in Whitechapel at that time. Every single one of them had 2 or 3 clients a day. You're talking about thousands and thousands of interactions that the police could not keep up with, couldn't monitor, which is why he slipped under the radar. It actually worked to his benefit. Although he took extraordinary risks in the murder sites with people walking past and populated areas, it actually worked to his advantage, because as soon as he'd done the dirty deed, he could just slip straight back into society 15, 20 foot away. Boom. He was just an ordinary plain man walking along the street. No one thought any different. It could have worked. The thing is as well, you need to remember, Jack the Ripper, after he murdered several of his victims, must have walked past multiple dozens of police patrols, Bobby's on the beat, undercover. He must have. So if you want, we can go through the murders now, because I can start. I can start to tell you, because I have studied this intensely, and once I get my teeth into something, I can't let go of it until I'm satisfied that I know. Right, I know. Right? I can't let it go, and so I've read everything that can be read. I've watched everything that can be watched, and I haven't really bothered with this for the last 6 months of my life, because there's nothing left to do. I can't think of anything new I can explore. So, first of all, one of the comments I've just seen is, "Oh, was it an American doctor?" No, Dr. Tumblety is. You watch documentaries; he's touted as being one of the suspects. Tumblety was 6'5", and he had a huge moustache like that. He was a complete eccentric doctor who stood out from the crowd.
Yeah. He was gay as well, wasn't he?
He got arrested. Yeah, he got arrested and he fled London because he was arrested for acts of homosexuality, which back then was criminalised. So it wasn't him. Because what people don't realise is there was multiple eyewitness sightings of Jack the Ripper. It wasn't as anonymous as we think. There was multiple eyewitness people who saw him with his victims in the moments before they was killed. So we can go through all of those eyewitness descriptions and come up with a rough kind of look and basic design of a photo fit that bridges all of those eyewitness accounts. And I've got it here. I'll just fold it up so as to not ruin the surprise. This is a kind of generic photo fit of what Jack the Ripper would have looked like.
Wow.
Okay, so you've got the hat, you've got a suave appearance, and you've got moustache. That's pretty much it. And they all say within the same age range, between 30 and 40. Forget anything else. 30 years old to 40 years old. That's how old Jack the Ripper was. Okay, so that's roughly what he looked like.
We've been doing it a while as well at that age. It wouldn't have been, he wouldn't have started with that. He probably fucking moved from animals to basic stabbings and then upped his game to the brutal murders we know of. I would have.
Well, first of all, right, we'll start off. The first genuine Jack the Ripper killing, I believe, was, and this is another thing as well I've noticed, the dates. If you're an eagle-eyed detective, you look at the dates, and there is actually a pattern to the dates of when these people were killed. You get early in the month, and then late in the month, and then early in the month, then late in the month. And it's always usually around kind of 7th or 8th of the month to start with, or the 29th, 30th towards the end of the month. And there's no other killings outside of those time brackets, those dates, all throughout the Autumn of Terror. So the first murder which took place, there's, like I said, one of the chief police officers who's involved in 1888, McNaughton, he said that there's only 5 Jack the Ripper victims. Well, there's not. But we can scrub what he says because of the standard of policing back then. The first categorical Jack the Ripper victim was, do you know, you might know it, Luke, or I don't know where Fonzie lives, but Gunthorpe Street in Whitechapel. Do you know that?
No,
yeah, I've heard of it.
I'm not familiar with Whitechapel.
If you go to the White Hart pub, the one I referenced earlier, there's an archway. Okay, there's an archway with an alley, and it's one of the only few remaining cobbled streets in London. And those cobbles date from the Victorian era. Those cobbles, Jack the Ripper and many of his victims would have walked over those cobblestones in Gunthorpe Street. Back then it was called George Yard.
You know.
It's one of the, there's only a tiny number.
Yeah, George Yard. Yeah, because they mentioned it on a documentary I watched. Yeah, I know what you're about as well. I didn't realise that was the same place. Right, gotcha.
So basically, a prostitute called Martha Taberham, roughly 3-4 in the morning, met a client up that road, up the cobbled street, which was called George Yard. And for a bit of peace and quiet, they went into George Yard building, which if you go through the archway and walk up to the end, it was the last sort of big building on the left. It's been replaced by a modern building now. But I'll show you all this, Luke. As we go along, I'll show you everything when we do our Jack the Ripper tour. So
got to record that, man. That would be brilliant. I want to see that for sure. What
you need to look for is the links, because serial killers get worse and worse as time goes on. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll take you through the murders, and you can see a link from one murder to the next, and you can see a link which ties them all together. So Martha Taberham, she was stabbed in the neck multiple times, and she was stabbed 40 times in her abdomen and vagina. So if you imagine
what's going on, I would have thought.
If you imagine, this was his first time killing a woman in public, right? So all he's done, he hasn't sat there and done any meticulous mutilations or opened her abdomen or anything like that. What he's done is just a frenzy of stabbing. It's just a complete wild frenzy. And that was his first murder that was his first appearance on the streets and murdering someone. So he stabbed her in the neck, and then he stabbed her in the abdomens and vagina. Note I said he stabbed her in the vagina. Note that, right? So that was the first killing, and that was unbelievable, right? Because a lot of people died and were murdered and killed in the East End, but this was just
mummy issues as well. That's a normal sign of a serial killer is mummy issues. A lot of them have issues with their mum, like they hate their mothers. Their mothers brought them up wrong, or didn't bring them up at all, dragged them up. That's something I'd note for people out there.
So the first one you had was Martha Taberham, and then 3 weeks later, at the end of August 1888, you have Polly Nichols, Mary Ann Nichols, Polly Nichols for short, was found in Bucks Row. It's now called Durwood Street. It's round the back of where they have the market on Whitechapel High Street. So yeah, she was found. She had her throat slashed, which was different to the first one. Her throat was slashed. This time, her stomach was ripped open, but she was stabbed in the vagina. So there you have the first link. So the first one is stabbed wounds in the vagina. And the second one, although it's quite different, the throat was slashed, not stabbed. The abdomen was mutilated, but she was stabbed in the vagina. So there you see a progression and an increase in the intensity or the ferocity of what he did to the second victim. A progression. It was an increase in the ferocity of the attack. So the next one. So at this time, he basically slashed open the abdomen, but he didn't do anything else with it. He didn't pull out the intestines. He didn't take away internal organs. About a week later, in early September, on Hanbury Street, there's number 29. There's a huge brewery and a car park there now, but back then there was just house after house after house. Number 29 in the back garden. Jack the Ripper took Annie Chapman. She'd been kicked out of a doss house on nearby Dorset Street, and she'd been forced to go out. She was dying of consumption. She was dying of tuberculosis. She was really sick, really unwell. And she was forced out because she never had the 4p for a bed. Yeah. So she's forced out onto the streets at like 4 a.m. And unfortunately, she went up Hanbury Street, past the 10 Bells pub on Commercial Street, right into Hanbury Street, and she bumped into Jack the Ripper. She was seen outside number 29 with Jack the Ripper by a woman called Elizabeth Long, who gave the police an eyewitness account of what this guy looked like. Again, moustache, hat, dark jacket, and a swarthy complexion. And I'll come to that in a minute when I float my best suspect. So basically, Jack the Ripper took Annie Chapman out into the back garden, and basically, again, he slit her throat.
Yeah.
This time he opened up her abdomen, and this time the intensity escalated again. Every attack is worse than the one before.
Mm-hmm.
So this time he pulled her intestines out. If you open up the stomach, one of the first things you'll see is the intestines. And it's quite, this guy did it for thrills. He did it for he wanted the publicity, he wanted the notoriety, he fed off it. So he pulled her intestines out and chucked them over her right shoulder. The right shoulder is significant, right? Remember the right shoulder. So he slashed her throat, opened up her abdomen, and took away, this time he took away her womb.
Was this the one where they found an apron near her? And that's where they got the leather apron theory.
Although the leather apron they found in the back garden actually belonged to someone in the house. He was completely innocent.
Yeah, he was just an innocent butcher, wasn't he? He'd washed it out and hung it out as you would. And
exactly. But that gave rise,
to his thing for a smoke, and I think he was the one that see her. He said he came out at like 1 in the morning, and then came out again at 5, and then found her.
Yeah.
And there was someone else that had seen something along them lines, but basically he come out for another smoke, and what the fuck? Where did she get there? But there was a neighbour that had heard a thud on the ground.
That's it, yeah. So there was so what happened is while Annie Chapman was being killed, the next door neighbour, Albert Kadosh, came out of his house to relieve him, because the back garden, you didn't have toilets in those days. It was just you went out in the back garden and you had a slash. So he went out in the back garden and he heard something bang up against the fence. Now, of course, Annie Chapman was slaughtered right next to the fence. So he probably heard Annie Chapman being killed, but he didn't think nothing of it, and he was dead tired, so he took himself back off the bed. But if he would have gone up to that fence and looked over, he would have seen Jack the Ripper killing.
Jack the Ripper.
These are the type of risks that Jack the Ripper took. He wasn't.
Yeah.
He took massive risks of being discovered.
So it's a miracle I didn't. Like, it really is.
Yeah, like a one in whatever chance. Yeah, I mean, he was very close to being caught then, and there was another time where they saw him doing a Jewish guy. Oh, anyway, so we'll get to that. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to come to that actually.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm going to do here is the next so-called victim was a skinny Swedish woman called Elizabeth Stride. She was killed on Berner Street, which is now Henrique Street, off Commercial Road, which is just more to the south of Whitechapel. I don't actually believe that she was a Jack the Ripper victim, because she had a notoriously violent and aggressive partner who would not leave her alone. I can't remember his name. But she was seen by an eyewitness being physically assaulted in the street. It didn't start off. It didn't start off down an alley. It started off on the street. Outside, it must be said, a very, very busy, packed social club, right?
Yeah.
There's people coming in and out all the time. That to me doesn't strike me to be Jack the Ripper.
That's the one I think that I was just about to say, because it was a Russian Jewish guy that was walking past afterwards when they took it down to the alley. She was strangled, right? Wasn't she? She was strangled, and he said there was 2 geezers there.
He said there was two geezers there. The knife that was used to kill her was much smaller than the other Jack the Ripper killings. They can calculate this kind of thing somehow. Yeah. These forensic detectives.
They put in the wound to measure the depth of,
And of course, she only had her throat slit, and that was no mutilation, no anything else. So she was basically strangled and had a throat cut with a smaller knife. But she was 2 men, and one of them physically assaulted her in broad public. And
one of them chased him away, didn't he? He called an anti-Semitic slur, and then chased him. Chased him down the road, and then she got killed. And he said that he was like 5'5" at best, wasn't he? He was really small. He wasn't. But because he was an immigrant, they didn't really take his word for it seriously. They just sort of dismissed it.
The thing is, as well, what you need to remember, that eyewitness sighting of Elizabeth Stride being assaulted, I think he punched her to the ground, and she didn't. If she was under attack, she would have screamed her head off. She didn't scream her head off. So that implies that she kind of knew the person. She let out some kind of cry, but it was only half-hearted, and it's almost. Do you know? I'm not being
like a domestic, isn't it?
A kind of a domestic, yeah.
Yeah, as you'd expect someone to be, you know. Oh, I don't want people getting involved, but he's, you know, if you were fearing like you're being attacked by a complete stranger, you're probably going to react and scream, and you're going to be in absolute terror. If you know the person, you're probably going to be more angry with them, and you don't.
Yeah.
React
You're not going to scream your head off and and scream for help and all that. Not if it's your partner, you know. So I think she was the victim of an abusive kind of partner who was known for it. His second name is Kidney. I can't remember his first name. And the thing is as well, her throat was cut halfway. So that doesn't and the manner in which she died, you know, the way she was assaulted by the assailant outside a social club doesn't scream to me like Jack the Ripper. So I don't think she was a Jack the Ripper victim, which makes sense, because if we go to the next victim, the eyewitness, like you said there, a Jewish guy was walking past and he got chased off by one of the two men. Right? His name was Israel Schwartz. He got chased off, but he gave an eyewitness statement to the police the next day of what this guy looked like. And he looked totally different.
Yeah.
So the next murder, which took place the same night, Catherine Eddowes was the next victim the same night, 45 minutes later, on the other end of Whitechapel, on the other extreme end of Whitechapel.
I'd go with she was an unrelated coincidence. I mean, detectives don't believe in coincidence. They're taught.
Excuse me.
Things in a coincidence. So we'll, you know, don't you know. Look into everything, but back then they wouldn't have done, and they probably would have just put it up to that was definitely him, because it's another murder of a prostitute. It's like, but are there any other similarities apart from the fact that they are both prostitutes? No.
So what happened 45 minutes later at the other end of Whitechapel, so you're going more towards the City of London, there used to be a square hemmed in by warehouses and packed roads called Mitre Square. So I'll take you to, and you'll find this the most spooky of all. I find it the most spooky because you can stand in the exact same spot where Jack the Ripper basically seduced Catherine Eddowes, which is at the end of an alley leading into Mitre Square. So what happened was 3 Jewish men came out of the Imperial Social Club on Duke Street, right? They came out and they walked home. As they was walking home, about 30 foot down the road, they saw a man who was wearing completely different clothes to the man who assaulted and killed Elizabeth Stride 45 minutes earlier at the other end of Whitechapel. Different clothes, right? That's a key thing. That's how you can. I can, you know, wipe my hands of Elizabeth Stride. I don't think she was a Jack the Ripper victim. I think she was a domestic violence victim, personally. But Catherine Eddowes, these 3 Jews walked along and they saw a man up against the wall and a woman who they identified as Catherine Eddowes by the clothing the next day, had her hand on his chest and she was talking to him. And then if you walk down the alley into what used to be called Ripper Corner, the corner of the square, it's quite a spooky experience going there. Because you can stand, in all of these different murders, you can stand on the exact same spot where the real Jack the Ripper ripped them to shreds. You can stand there, and it's
got to be surreal,
Yeah, it is surreal because you look at it, and it's just this is just an ordinary.
Was she the one that lied to her husband and said she was going to see her sister in Bermondsey?
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Yeah. So the next one, Catherine Eddowes was arrested earlier that evening for being drunk and disorderly on Whitechapel High Street. She was taken to Bishop Street, not Bishop Street, what's it called? Up the top, Bishopsgate Police Station. She was released from there at 1 a.m. in the morning. She was released from there, and she walked down to St Botolph's Church, which is still there, and it hasn't changed since Victorian times. That church is significant because it was called the Church of the Prostitutes, because the prostitutes used to hang around congregate outside that church, and it was known to be very friendly to their plight, because these women didn't prostitute themselves because they loved it. They did it because they was suffering extreme urban poverty and it was either prostitute yourselves or die, starve to death. No one gave a damn back then. No one cared. So that was their only means of survival. So Jack the Ripper picked up Catherine Eddowes, and literally 20 foot away is Church Passage, which takes you into Mitre Square. So in Mitre Square, in the corner, Catherine Eddowes had her throat slashed. She had her abdomen opened. Her intestines were placed over her right shoulder, just exactly the same manner as the previous victim, Annie Chapman. Right. Yeah. So there's the link. Now this time he took her womb like he took Annie Chapman's womb, but this time he also took a kidney, and Catherine Eddowes did have Bright's disease, which is it's a disease that alcoholics get, right? So she had Bright's disease. So Jack the Ripper took away a kidney that had Bright's disease, right? He took away her womb. So the womb and the intestines over the right shoulder connect it to the previous murder of Annie Chapman, right?
Can I just ask, would these have been things that only the police would have known? Like,
no, this was common knowledge. This was common knowledge.
No, at the time, what I'm trying to get at is, could someone have got that knowledge and then copycatted? Yeah, like, would that have been released to the press from the previous murder?
In the same area of Whitechapel, the same geezer. If there's more than one person doing those kind of crimes, that's highly unlikely.
Yeah, of course, but I have to ask.
Impossibly unlikely. Yeah, it's impossibly unlikely. You're talking about a solo lone individual here. You talk about one person who's completely gone. Is completely mad. So the connection. So you have the connection. So if you leapfrog over Elizabeth Stride, you can connect Annie Chapman with a logical progression to Catherine Eddowes. So you have the womb was taken, the intestines were placed over the right shoulder. Now the increase in intensity of this murder is the mutilations to the face. Jack the Ripper chopped the end of her nose off, he chopped her earlobes off, and he slashed her face massive. So if you Google Catherine Eddowes, you'll see her face is completely mangled.
Yeah, they took pictures of this one, didn't they? They actually got it's fucking horrific.
Yeah, I've seen them.
It looks unreal. It looks like it's a dummy or something. It's so badly mutilated. It just looks like they've just put something together. You know, if you go to like Tower of London and stuff like that, not Tower of London, London Dungeon, they have like pictures up and stuff like that. It's proper like, oh, fucking hell, that's naughty. Do you know they've got a Berlin dungeons as well? Like they have a proper carbon copy of like the London dungeons. Yeah, for real.
Never been to Berlin.
It's
never been to Berlin.
Yeah,
but
I went there for a few hours a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if anyone heard about that story. I had to get there really quickly. And when we got to the airport, there was all like, they got a Madame Tussauds and then a Berlin dungeon. I was like, that's exactly the same as the London. Like, it's weird, but yeah. Onwards anyway. Just saying.
But yeah, there's actually a Jack the Ripper museum in East London. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It's on Cable Street. But I've been there. It's very rudimentary, basics kind of. It's more like a tourist attraction. It's not something someone who studied it and researched it a lot will go around it and be a bit unimpressed.
Yeah, all right. Right, well, you just picking it apart the whole time, like fucking spoiling it for everyone.
Wanting your money back. Yeah.
But so then you have Catherine Eddowes, right? So what happens is, now Jack the Ripper is obviously, after Catherine Eddowes is slain in Mitre Square, a very short distance away is a road called Galston Street. It's it's home to the famous Petticoat Lane Market.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I think it's called, the above bit's called Middlesex Street now, and it was called Petticoat Lane, and it became famous as Petticoat Lane. But Queen Victoria didn't like it being called Petticoat Lane because it was such a down and out area, and petticoats were meant to be for aristocrats. So she asked them to change the bloody name, right? So it became Middlesex Street and Galston Street. Yeah. So up Galston Street, you can still go to the entrance. A policeman looked inside a doorway, which is still there. He looked inside a doorway, and he noticed on the floor a piece of white apron. Now, this apron had been cut off of Catherine Eddowes in order for Jack the Ripper to walk away and wipe his hands clean of blood. And he dropped it in the doorway in Galston Street. Now, this is another part of the Ripper legend, is that above it was some anti-Semitic graffiti. Mm-hmm. I don't believe the two are connected, because anti-Semitism at the height of the Jack the Ripper crisis was rife throughout East London, all right?
Well, I think not only that, the previous murder had been blamed on the Jewish guy, wasn't it? He was called
Pizer, Leather Apron, John Pizer. So
the police chief was well aware of that, and then the fact that that was dropped right there where there was anti-Semitic graffiti, I think he had it removed, didn't he? He was like, "Look at that! I want that gone. This is not, because we're going to end up with a fucking riot."
Yeah. So Charles Warren, the highest commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, turned up and said, "Wipe it off immediately," which means that no photo could be taken of it. They was bringing a camera to take a photo of it, which I wish they would have done, because that would have been interesting from a historical point of view. But I don't think they were connected. I think that was just some random anti-Semitic graffiti.
It was jotted, wasn't it? It was jotted on a policeman's notes, and it said, "The Jews are the men who won't be blamed for nothing." Something like that, wasn't it?
No, that's exactly it, verbatim. What you just said, that was exactly it.
Yeah.
So that was just some anti-Semitic graffiti. I don't think that Jack the Ripper, as careful as he was to not get caught, actually stood in a doorway where people were passing literally every 5 seconds, and actually sat there with, pulled out a piece of chalk and wrote some cryptic graffiti on a wall, and then sodded off.
In the dark.
In the dark, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it doesn't add up, really, does it? You know, you ain't got to be a rocket scientist to figure out. Imagine that, right? You've just committed a murder. You want to get away. You want to get the fuck out of there. You're wiping blood off your fucking self. You would be smothered with what you just did, because he absolutely butchered it. It was his worst one, wasn't it? It was the worst one he'd ever done, and the youngest victim.
The worst? No, that's coming up.
All right.
So what you're doing now? So what happened is, that was the only clue. The only clue to anything in the whole Jack the Ripper inquiry is the fact that he dropped that apron in Galston Street, which meant he went from kind of like the City of London, and he was going back out into Whitechapel. He was going into Whitechapel, right? I'll come to that in a minute, why it's significant clue. It really is significant, right? So so what happened now is, so you had 2 murders in one night, and you can imagine this was at the height. This freaked out the entire world, not only the country. Queen Victoria got involved. It was an international incident, right? This is massive all across the world, right? And the police...
They got the story as far as Chicago and stuff like that. They were printing them off in Chicago Times or whatever it was back then, and stuff like that. You know, that was... I think they even... Did they call in a Pinkerton at one point to try and get this fucker? Was that something, or was that just something that was fabricated TV show? They called in like a Pinkerton. The Pinkertons were like a detective agency they started in Chicago. This guy called Pinkerton, he was like a general of some sort. And they were the ones that went and hunted down, like, you know, bandits and proper criminals. They ended up becoming the FBI, Pinkertons or something like that. I'm pretty sure they called in one of them to sort of, can you fucking find out who the fuck did this? You're supposed to be the best. Come and have a look. And they were drawing a blank, like, I don't know, mate, like it's gone cold. The trail's gone cold. And I think that's how the H.H. Holmes theory come in.
Yeah. I've looked into that. I looked into that suspect, H.H. Holmes and all that, and I think it's completely nonsensical. I think it's a stab in the dark. Because when I explain to you, and I've got the printouts here, I'm building up to it. When I come to explain to you, I believe, and a lot of people believe, is the real, not the myth, not the legend, the real Jack the Ripper. You'll see there's so much circumstantial. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Over and over again.
Connect the dots. This is, you know, this has got to make the most sense. It's got to be the most logical. It's got to be the most simplified.
Yeah.
The more complicated it gets, the more unlikely it is. You know what I mean? This ain't TV. Yeah. This ain't. Yeah.
Well, there's got to be solid circumstantial, if not forensic, but circumstantial evidence against any suspect, right? And I think that this is almost an ironclad case. If you took this to a court, I think they could run with it and convict. But we'll come to that in a bit. So what happened is, after the murder of Catherine Eddowes, you had an international frenzy. And what the police did is because there was hardly any clues, and they literally was clueless as to what was happening or who it was. They had nothing to go on. And you're talking about a densely populated area, overcrowded, slum, full of criminality and poverty. So what they did was they did what was called a dragnet. So what they did is they flooded, and I mean flooded, the entire area with manpower. That's all they could do, is just increase the manpower to a level where he would feel so reluctant to actually go out and do anything that he'd stop. That was the idea, right? It was quite a sound thing, considering there's no CCTV or forensics or anything like that.
Do you know what? He must have been a lone ranger completely. He must have told no one, because most murders are solved by grasses. Not grasses, because, you know, if someone kills someone, you should tell the police. Like, honestly, there's no shame in bubbling someone up for fucking grassing on murder. He must have done it completely alone. He must have been completely alone, lived alone, solitary man, no family, because nigh on every murder you can pull up, I'd put in the 90% range, are solved by someone coming forward with evidence, right? This geezer must have been, for me, someone that was a completely sole unit operation. Can
I just before we go any further, can I just answer a very important question that's just been put in the comments?
Yeah.
Obviously, he savagely mutilated a lot of victims and walked off into the mainstream of Whitechapel population, and literally wasn't. You'd expect him to be covered in blood like a slaughterman.
Right. Yeah. That's what I mean. That
wasn't the case. Most modern detectives know that this isn't the case, because what happens is most of these victims were subdued before they had their throats slashed. They were strangled. They were asphyxiated first. So a lot of them had marks that basically indicate that they were strangled. So if you strangle someone, and a man overpowering a woman, strangling them to death, then what happens is their heart stops, blood pressure drops. So you could literally slash the throat, open up the abdomen. You will not get covered in blood because there's no blood pressure.
Oh yeah.
There's no spurt. Yeah, there's no spurt. There's no Hollywood. Yeah.
Now, what we do know is that with Catherine Eddowes, the latest victim, he reached into her abdomen, grabbed her intestines and put them over her right shoulder, and he went in and grabbed a kidney and took the kidney and the womb away with him. So he had to reach in and get his hands covered in blood. So what he did was he cut off a piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron, and he must have been walking around the streets like this with the apron, washing his hands, wiping his hands free of blood. And then he dropped that apron in Galston Street in the doorway underneath the graffiti. And that's so he would have had messy hands, but he wouldn't have been covered in blood like you would expect, because the heart had already stopped in the victims. The blood pressure had dropped completely. So he could have cut and slashed and mutilated and dismembered, and there'd have been no spray, nothing at all. So
when you're doing that kind of act, 10 minutes is a long time. 10 minutes don't seem like a long time, but how long would it take you to mutilate and do all these things that he was doing? A matter of 10 minutes, I mean, maximum. That's not that long of a time.
Well, there's modern police. A lot of the modern police surgeons and people who have looked over modern people who have there's a lot of experience now amongst the police forces of the world about serial killers and mutilation. For example, Catherine Eddowes, they said, that would have taken 15 minutes. It's just, but most things I've seen from serious people say that it would literally taken 2 minutes because it was crude.
That's what I mean. And they're saying these things would have taken 10 minutes and that.
No, these things would have taken a couple of minutes at most.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's not what you think. It's not going to take that long, and even if he did have 10 minutes, that's a hell of a long time for him to get done what he had done.
Well, the thing interesting about Catherine Eddowes is if you look at the Times, when the three Jewish men came out of the social club and spotted Jack the Ripper at the entrance to the alley leading into Mitre Square with Catherine Eddowes, 5 minutes later, she was found by a policeman who every policeman in that area, they did patrols, set patrols. One of the policemen went back and through Mitre Square every 15 minutes. So he had a very, very small window of opportunity. So literally, you've got a 5-minute window between being at the end of an alley and being completely massacred. 5 minutes, 5-minute window. And the same with a lot of the other victims as well. You're talking about Jack the Ripper taking extraordinary risks to do what he did, extraordinary risks. And it was only by literally the best luck imaginable that he managed to evade capture. So what happened was the police reacted to international scrutiny and the monarchy getting involved in the pressure for them to do something about what was happening. What happened was they flooded, and I mean flooded the area with extra policemen, extra detectives, extra something like, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of extra policemen on top of hundreds already into an area that's quite small, Whitechapel. You talk about 2 square miles. So the whole place was on lockdown, right? We think we're on lockdown with this coronavirus. That place was on lockdown. What they did is, so what you have is you have a 6-week period. No, 5 weeks. You have 5-week period where there's no murders. And what happens is people start to breathe a sigh of relief. I believe Jack the Ripper looked out his window and thought, this place is saturated with police officers. I'm going to leave it a bit for things to calm down. So you have, instead of the usual 3-week or 1-week gap between the murders, you have a 5-week gap. So you go the whole of October 1888 with no murders. And then I think I can't remember, on the 8th of November, so you go October, nothing. Life starts to return to normal. People start to relax a little bit, right? And then on the 8th of November, a 25-year-old Irish girl called Mary Kelly comes out of a squalid, stinking single room on Dorset Street, which doesn't exist anymore. And she walks down Commercial Street. And as she's walking down Commercial Street, she gets to where the intersection where Frill Street used to stand. And she's tapped on the shoulder by a man. And she leads the man back to Dorset Street and into her room. The next morning she's found, and I don't even need to explain the progression, the intensity of violence for this attack, because this is the first time Jack the Ripper was in a room, and it's the first time that he had basically he was left within an environment where he wouldn't get disturbed, and he took a maximum advantage of that. So he chopped all of the flesh off of her legs, her thighs, and put it onto the bedside cabinet, right? Bedside table. He took all the flesh off. So in the photo, the first crime scene photo of a murder in Britain was Mary Kelly in Dorset Street in her room, where she's in her bed, with her legs are open, her hands, her left hand is placed over her abdomen. But basically, he took out all of her internal organs. So, for example, between her legs, between her feet on the bed was her liver. Her spleen and one of her breasts was underneath her head like a pillow. Her heart was taken away. A huge pile of flesh was sitting on the bedside table. I can't remember from the top of my head, from memory, what else he did to her, but he basically took her entire face off. He hacked it.
He took the eyelids, he took the eyebrows, he took the lips, he cut all that off. And
so she can't even make her face; just looks like a mess. Can't make out her face at all in the crime scene photo. Yeah. You can't make in the crime scene photo. You can see her bones on her thigh exposed because he's cut. He spent time cutting the flesh off.
Yeah, the whole thing. You can just see like these 2 chicken leg things. It's like, what the fuck?
And basically, the abdomen cavity, the abdomen area, and the vagina is gone. It just isn't there. It's just masses of flesh. And it's just right down to the bone. It's just nothing there. So he spent a long time, fulfilling his darkest and deepest desires and fantasies. And it's when you look at that, it's the first time they took a crime scene photo of a Jack the Ripper victim, and it's just harrowing. Completely destroyed her, just ripped her to shreds.
I think the cameraman was throwing up and stuff like that. He was like, do this. This is just, and he's like, you fucking do it. Just fucking get on with it. You know, had to sort of force him to do it. He's like, I've never seen anything like this. This is, you know, can you imagine the PTSD after seeing something like that? Yeah. And this wasn't, you got to think as well. This wasn't times where people were more, sort of like nowadays we're kind of desensitized to stuff.
We are, because of horror films and stuff like that. You know, we're
a lot more than
desensitized to gore. Yeah.
And they were very sort of religious. It was very religious times. Very sort of, you know, you didn't really talk about sex. You know, it was all taboo. Everything.
You didn't have TV and a relentless diet of battles or horror films and blood and gore. You know, like a film like Saw. You know, like they've produced about 6 of them. But you know, Saw. You know, you can watch films like that all the time now. And so we are.
Someone of that day, they would commit suicide probably. I remember hearing about. Sorry, not remember when, but I remember hearing about when. What was it called? That fucking The Exorcist came out, and there were people committing suicide after watching it. And you're like, I've watched that. It's crap. Like it's.
Yeah.
It wasn't that scary to me at all, and I sort of realised how desensitised am I if I can sort of sit and watch this. You know, that was such a big deal. It got banned, and I'm watching it like, this is a joke, isn't it? This is terrible. Like the effects are rubbish compared to nowadays. It hasn't stood the test of time at all.
But you imagine a crime of that magnitude in the Victorian era. You know, it's just never been seen in history. No. You know, you have battles where warriors or soldiers mutilate each other with axes and swords, but you're talking about Victorian England here, and you're talking about the worst mutilation you could probably fathom.
Yeah, I'm saying this, but they used to have like public hangings and stuff. So,
watching someone being hanged and seeing someone who'd had all of their flesh cut off and their abdomen opened up and their face hacked beyond. You know, it's a different level.
Yeah, you've got churches and stuff like that blaming it on the devil and saying this is the devil. The devil is here. You know, you can imagine what that would do to your psyche, being a deeply religious like person where you believe in. Definitely, it's demonic.
This is your fault for sinning.
Yeah,
and we're Christians, by the way.
You know,
but we can still say it. We can still say it.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like it
true.
Would have been terrible.
You've never
seen that. You're just a cameraman. You're just a photographer. You got to go and take pictures of this shit. And you're like, what is this? No, thanks. No, get the fucking do it. Get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel sorry for that cameraman. He took one from outside the room through a window. They actually removed the window so they could get a better vantage point. He actually took the camera off and took it, and he had to lay the camera next to her off of her right side.
Yeah,
and that photo, you can see a big pile of flesh just sitting on the table. You know, it's for Victorian England, this was unfathomable. You know, this was pure evil incarnate.
Yeah, it's not well. You know what I mean? It's
Imagine going in there and the smell as well. Like,
she'd been left for hours. Rigor mortis had kicked in. She'd been left for hours and hours and hours. From the probably early hours of the morning, and they didn't bang open the door until 11 a.m. So you talk about hours and hours of decomposing flesh smell building up in a room. It must have been truly horrible. I mean, for
especially
people
once the guts come out as well, that's where the worst.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Yeah. Well, one of the worst. I have heard from a geezer, a woman that does post-mortems. The worst smell on a human body. Do you know where it is? This is for the audience as well.
Bladder, I don't know, guts.
Go on, spit it out.
Sinuses.
Oh,
sinuses.
Really?
Once you open up that part, the worst smell. Because once it's sat there, that's where the germs are. That's where your snot comes out. That's where your bogies, all the bacteria builds up. So once a body's been there for a while, once they open up that part, smell is from there. It's not the guts. It's not the intestines. It's not anywhere else. It's there. Once that.
But you know what, guys?
That's
we haven't
madness.
even right. If you pick up 99% of all Jack the Ripper books or documentaries, this is where the story ends. Right?
Yeah.
The murder of Mary Kelly, life returns to normal.
Yeah.
Right. This is what I was going to say to you as well, Paul. I think I know where you're going with this. Because that was the last. This is what you're saying. That was the last one, and I did say to you earlier Like, I bet that's not the last one. So please, man, if you can.
Yeah. Next.
Right. What you have is right. So what happened is all of a sudden, about a year later, in New York City in America, you have a prostitute called Carrie Brown, right? And she's found in a brothel. Now, the police at the time were like, wow, we've seen this before. We've recognized this because they're all homicide detectives and they've seen what happened 8 months before in Whitechapel. They thought, hold on a minute. This is really, this, we recognize this work. So Carrie Brown had her abdomen opened up. All of her organs were placed around the bed and so on and so forth. So, and her throat was slashed and you had all the typical hallmarks of a Jack the Ripper killing in New York. And then it happens again. So that before I go on, I haven't got any more specifics, but what it is, there is a wave of Jack the Ripper style murders across the United States. Okay. In places like Galveston, Texas, San Francisco, LA, all across America. But I'll come to that in a minute. So Jack the Ripper, in my opinion, most probably went to America because you're literally people of that sadistic nature on that level with that experience only come along once a millennium, in my opinion. So here we come to who I believe was Jack the Ripper. There was a guy who lived in a broken home. Now it comes back to what you said a minute ago, mummy issues. This guy actually came from Preston in the Northwest. His name was James Kelly. Does that ring a bell?
James Kelly. No, go on.
Right.
All right.
Okay, let me explain. Well, basically, he moved to London and he married a woman called Sarah. But basically, he lived just up the road from Whitechapel. If you go through Whitechapel, through Shoreditch, then you come to an area. Do you know where the McDonald's is on the way to King's Cross?
Yeah.
That area. He lived in that area. It's all gone now, the original roads and all that. But he lived in that area. And he used to have lads' nights out in the East End. He used to frequent prostitutes in the East End. So he was getting married to this woman called Sarah. And at the same time, he was frequenting prostitutes in the East End. Now, one of these prostitutes gave him venereal disease. Venereal disease can spark off a degenerative mental process.
Yeah.
Right? So he becomes paranoid. But what he does is that comes back to what a classic police work motive. Why did Jack the Ripper have such a thing against prostitutes? When you talk about James Kelly, he hated prostitutes because they gave him venereal disease. They gave him venereal disease, and he got married to his wife, Sarah, and he started to have a mental downward spiral. So what happened is you have to read a book. I urge everyone to go out and buy this book.
Well, will it closer? Will it focus? There you go.
I don't think you see it because I've got blur the background on. So I'll put it up anyway afterwards. But it's called Prisoner 1167, The Madman Who Was Jack the Ripper by James Tully. Okay? And
okay.
When you read that book, this guy has done a gigantic amount of research on this character. His name's James Kelly. As the second name suggests, he is of Irish extraction. Now, have you noticed that all of the eyewitness statements of Jack the Ripper, he was spotted in Hanbury Street talking to Annie Chapman. He was spotted in, where else was he spotted? At the alleyway at Mitre Square by the three Jewish gentlemen coming out of the social club. They all gave the same rough description, right? He had a moustache, he had a hat, a black coat, and he looked suave, foreign looking, suave. Remember, there was a lot of Jews in the East London at that point, a lot of anti-Semitism. So the statement that he looked suave is quite significant. I showed this before. That is a kind of photo fit of roughly what Jack the Ripper looked like if you combine all the eyewitness sightings, right? So let me just show you a picture of this guy. Now, have you noticed how some Irish people can be quite dark? Dark eyes, dark hair, and kind of, almost like an olivey skin. Have you noticed that, like an Irish, ancient Celtic type of strand within Irish people? Well, This is the only picture of James Kelly in existence from when he was in his 20s.
Perfect example, Colin Farrell.
Exactly. Yeah. So when they say he looked Jewish, Jack the Ripper looked Jewish appearance, he could have, of course, been dark Irish appearance, swarthy looking with dark features and dark hair. So this guy here, this is the only photo of James Kelly in existence, right? Now, have a look at this. Yeah.
You've seen that, yep.
And then have a look at that.
It's undeniable, uncanny.
Okay. So any Jack the Ripper suspect has to match or at least closely, roughly resemble the eyewitness sightings. So when you come to a lot of these Jack the Ripper suspects, the traditional ones like Dr. Tumblety and all that, he doesn't match the eyewitness descriptions at all. As a policeman, you can get rid of him. And then loads of other suspects, you could discredit them because they don't look nothing like the bloody eyewitness accounts, right? So that is what a photo fit of roughly what Jack the Ripper looked like if you combine the eyewitness statements. And that is James Kelly, the only known photo of him. I see a strong resemblance there between them two, right?
And the motive.
So the motive was he was frequenting the prostitutes of East London. They gave him some sexually transmitted disease, which started a process of mental degeneration. But here we come to the crunch, right? He blamed, because what happened was he actually killed his wife because he became so paranoid and so messed up in the head. He actually killed his wife in a fit of rage. And he actually accused his wife of being a prostitute, right? Yeah. So he lives 10 minutes from Whitechapel at this point. Mm-hmm. And he kills his wife. Now, here we go to linking the victims. He killed his wife by stabbing her in the neck. Now, rewind back to the very first Jack the Ripper victim, Martha Tabram, in George's Yard, yeah?
Yeah.
She was stabbed in the neck.
Yep.
Yep.
First Jack the Ripper victim we know of was stabbed in the neck. This guy killed his wife by being stabbed in the neck. This guy was arrested and put on trial for murder. And do you know why he didn't face the gallows?
He escaped.
Because they declared him insane, right? Because he was obviously a bit loopy. So what they did was they said, we can't hang him because he's mentally ill. So what they did was sent him to Broadmoor. And he became prisoner 1167 in Broadmoor. Right?
Yep.
Now, why he was in Broadmoor, the records show that he blamed prostitutes for the breakdown of his life and the breakdown of his marriage.
It's not
didn't
your
blame
fault.
yourself.
Put your fucking wanger out, mate, and stick it.
Yeah, didn't blame yourself. It's your fault.
Yeah. If you know,
like
paranoid people will blame anyone but themselves. You know, he was a paranoid schizophrenic. He'd blame everyone but himself.
Especially sociopaths. It wasn't them. It wasn't my fucking fault. It was her. She mouthed off to me.
Exactly.
So why the fuck did you string her up by her intestines? Well, because she mouthed off to me. So it's her fault. She made me do that. Yeah, makes sense, mate. Yeah, gotcha. Everyone's fault but yours.
So here you have a guy who killed his wife because he was facing mental degeneration, who hated prostitutes and was basically sent to Broadmoor for being clinically insane. He killed his wife by stabbing her in the neck. The first Jack the Ripper victim, Martha Tabram, was killed by the blows that caused death were being stabbed in the neck. So there you have a strong piece of evidence that connects what he did to his wife to the first Jack the Ripper murder. So moving on. So this guy, remember we talked about how Jack the Ripper must have been very cunning and very careful because he escaped capture. He escaped detection in the...
Was it more dumb luck, Paul? Was it more dumb...
I think it was a mixture. I think it was a mixture of cunning and carefulness and luck, right? So moving on, this guy, James Kelly, was clever enough and cunning enough under the nose of the people in Broadmoor to shape a piece of metal into a key, which enabled him to escape Broadmoor. He's one of the only people who's escaped Broadmoor. He actually escaped from Broadmoor, get when? 4 or 5 months before the Jack the Ripper murders. Right? So here's a guy who escaped Broadmoor by being cunning, by being clued up. Although he was clinically insane, he was also switched on enough that he was able to escape.
Cunning and like mental stability are not, they don't go hand in hand. You can be cunning, you can be smart, you can be genius intellect. Doesn't
totally
mean
insane. Totally insane at the same time. Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's got nothing to do with being unintelligent at all. It's quite the opposite. Yeah. Even though you're not. I think they're on different frequencies to us. Like it's like we're all on Capital FM, and them fuckers are on like Heart or something. They're just not in the same world as us, but they are in the same world as us. It's a real fucking mind boggle. Like,
it's a strong case though, man. Fuck.
Oh man,
it gets even stronger. It gets even stronger, right? So this guy.
Show me that picture. Show me that picture. What hat was he wearing?
No, he ain't wearing your hat.
This is the only known photo of James Kelly.
Is that a top hat? I
can't actually see what kind of hat that is.
Oh yes.
I'm saying top hat. I'm sticking to it.
The quality and the resolution is too pixelated. You see, this was one of those small photos that you used to have in a locket around your neck. I've obviously printed it out A4, but that was so obviously that's 130 years plus old. So, so this guy. So what happened is, while he was in Broadmoor, he talked about a mission. This guy was extremely religious. This guy was brought up a Catholic. Yeah, this guy was brought up a Catholic, and all. He felt shame that he had frequented prostitutes, and he felt that he was being punished because he'd frequented prostitutes and it had basically wrecked his life. And he'd become a paranoid schizophrenic. He'd murdered his wife and he'd ended up in Broadmoor. So while he was in Broadmoor, he talked about what he called a divine mission. No one knew what it was, but he talked about a mission that he was going to carry out.
Makes sense. That's actually not that rare. That these BTK, for example, BTK, he was out to punish for whatever fucking reason. Yeah, for real. Yeah. He was a religious guy. He was like the leader of his church or something like that.
So this guy escaped from Broadmoor months before the Jack the Ripper murders. And what he did was, believe it or not, he walked from Berkshire, where Broadmoor is, and he walked round to where Crawley in Sussex is, and then walked up through South London to Whitechapel. The only people he knew outside of the family of his murdered wife was a family or friends in Whitechapel. So he actually went, and he went to Whitechapel a few months after escaping. He managed to get there. And then you have the Jack the Ripper frenzy. You have the Jack the Ripper murders. Now, what happened is when Mary Kelly was killed, I will skip over the murders. Yeah. This guy had motive, and there's a powerful connecting factor between the way he murdered his wife and the way the first Jack the Ripper victim died, being stabbed in the neck. There's a connection there, right?
Yeah. That shit worked the first time. I'll stick to what I know. That's 101 of serial killers. They have a what do they call it? Modus operandi.
Modus operandi, an MO.
You said it earlier. Yeah, you said it earlier. That's
method of operating. Yeah, an MO.
This shit worked. I'm gonna do it again. There's no point changing from the script.
So So basically, we'll fast forward a bit after the last Jack the Ripper killing, right? This guy vanishes off the face of the earth for nearly 40 years. And then in 1927, he turns up again at Broadmoor Hospital, Broadmoor Asylum, right, that he'd escaped from. He turns up at Broadmoor again and says, look, I'm too old, I'm too frail to carry on. I just want to come back in and live my last couple of years in peace. So he goes back to Broadmoor. However, when he's in Broadmoor, this guy writes an account of what he'd been up to for the last 40 years. So what he does is he basically goes from Dover to France, through Belgium into Flanders. This guy, and he tells it all himself. And there's a guy called Ed Norris, right? He is the top New York NYPD cold case homicide detective. He has solved dozens of unsolved homicide cases in New York. Right.
So he's a cold case dude. This is
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The best of the best, right? And he did a documentary. He did a program about Jack the Ripper, and after going through all the evidence like I have, he came to the conclusion that James Kelly was Jack the Ripper. And what he did is the research he did was brilliant because he proved that this report, this kind of confession or a last will and testament that James Kelly wrote in Broadmoor before he died in 1929 as an old man. Now, when he turned up at Broadmoor, he looked like this. That's Jack the Ripper, right?
That actually looks more like that picture as well.
That's the face of evil, right? That is the face of evil. That's Jack the Ripper, right? So he turned up and he wrote his confession. Now, what this cold case detective did is he corroborated what James Kelly had claimed. So he said, I went here, I done this, I done that. So this guy checked it out and he found it all to be spot on. But even more than that, so what happened was this guy went to Rotterdam in Flanders or in Holland, I can't remember what you call it. He went to Rotterdam and he took a ship called the Zaandam to New York, and he arrived a few months before the murder of Carrie Brown. Do you remember I told you there's this Ripper victim in New York? He arrived a few months before. And then you have a Ripper victim in New York. This can't be, when you pile it all up together and you create a picture, you're starting to become very firm. This is not coincidence. This is firm evidence. This is circumstantial. So he goes to New York on the Zaandam, and he arrives a few months before Carrie Brown. And then there's two other Ripper-like murders in New York. And then, according to James Kelly himself, he says that when he escaped from Broadmoor, he was, and I quote, he was on the warpath for the rest of his life. He escaped. He escaped. He didn't elaborate. He didn't explain. Yeah. He just said, when I left Broadmoor, I was on the warpath, right? And he also said I had to contend most of my life with all sorts of skank. Now, skank back then is a word that is used to denote prostitutes. So he says that when he escaped from Broadmoor, he went to Whitechapel. Months later, the Ripper killings happened. He said that he was on the warpath for the rest of his life. He said he had to contend with skank, prostitutes, right? Now, every place in America where this guy claims that he went, this guy, Ed Norris, went through all of the newspaper. They store old newspapers, don't they, on microfilm in libraries and all that. So he went, say this guy said he went to Galveston, Texas. Ed Norris sat down there and spent weeks going through all of the newspapers from that period when James Kelly claims that he was in Galveston, Texas. What does he find? He finds a news report about a murder that they think was the work of Jack the Ripper. And then he goes and does the same. This guy, James Kelly, claimed he went to Vancouver, Dallas, LA, San Francisco. Ed Norris claims that he found newspaper reports of Ripper-style murders in all of these places where James Kelly went.
Well, like I said earlier, detectives, there's no such thing as coincidence. That's what they're told. They're like, listen, there's no such thing as a coincidence. Look into it all. And that makes fucking sense.
If you look at it in a more kind of a simple kind of analogy, right? If we went into your flat, Luke, and you weren't there, but your missus had been murdered right on the floor. If you actually came away and said, yeah, I was there half an hour before, but I didn't do it. It's not gonna wash, is it? Right?
No.
Do you the same way? If this guy claims he was in New York and then a Ripper killing happened, he says he was in Galveston, Texas, and a Ripper killing happened. Dallas, LA, San Francisco, Vancouver. Ripper killings happen.
They're big places, but all the telltale signs, all the calling cards are there, and you were there at the same time.
Look, it's either Jack the Ripper follows this guy around everywhere he goes, or he is Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, it's unfortunately in the courts it's only circumstantial because Texas is a big place, Vancouver's a big place, but fuck me, what are the chances of that?
There's no CCTV on file that you can check. There's no forensics you can check.
Yeah.
So you're talking about circumstantial case only. But get what? Do you know what this guy's job was? Do you know what his profession, his trade was?
Butcher, go on. Butcher, I'm going to throw it out there.
He was an upholsterer. Right? Now, upholsterers, what they used to do in those days, because they didn't have machines, they didn't have like modern technical little machines. In those days, an upholsterer, what he did was take a sofa and he would take a long, sharp knife and he would basically rip and tear all of the existing fabric from that, whatever he was working on, and replace it with new stuff.
I've done that myself, a bit of upholstering. I know.
So this guy, whether he is Jack the Ripper or not, this guy did to furniture what Jack the Ripper did to those victims.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is another powerful piece of circumstantial evidence. He was an upholsterer. He spent all his day ripping and shredding and cutting and
he would have had access to a sharp knife.
That's what I was just about to say. Yeah.
Peel off eyelids. I mean, your knife has to be sharp to do that.
But Ed Norris, right? Do you know that there's a couple of things we have to mention, right? And this is coming back to the detective techniques. This is where the case gets stronger, right? According to James Kelly, he was staying in a place called Collingwood Street in Whitechapel during the Autumn of Terror. He said that he escaped from Broadmoor. He took a long detour so he didn't get caught. And he ended up staying in Whitechapel in Collingwood Street, right? Which is...
Is that central to everything that happened?
Right, let me go. I'm just...
I've got the Whitechapel map in my head. Like I was literally watching this.
Collingwood Street, believe it or not, right, is up the eastern end, towards Romford end of Whitechapel, right?
On that way, on that way.
Now, what do we know about the only clue in the entire murder inquiry? We know that when they killed Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square, he took a piece of her apron, wiped his hands of blood, and he walked east, back into Whitechapel. Now, so wherever he lived had to have been east of the City of London. He had to have been walking back towards... basically, he was walking back to what it would have taken 20 minutes, but he was walking back towards Collingwood Street, where he was staying. There's several patterns for serial killers. There's marauders and there's commuters. So what commuters do is they choose an area which is nowhere near their home, and they commute into the kill zone.
Yeah.
Right? They're quite rare. Most murderers are what they call marauders. So basically, if you look at a marauder from his home, spreads out in all different directions, but then comes back to his home. So if you look at all the murders, the way they're dissipated, you have an area basically stretching from George's Yard or Central Whitechapel out to Bucks Row. Now, Bucks Row is very close to Collingwood Street, where this guy was staying. Now, what is the FBI in America did what they call geographical profiling. They catch a lot of killers like this. So they take all of the murder sites and they think, where's this guy most likely to live? They identify an area basically that includes where this guy was staying. And it fits the marauder pattern of a serial killer. So from his base in Collingwood Street,
I'm with you.
He could have found out in different directions.
So they've got dots all over Whitechapel, and it all sort of is around where this guy lived.
Yeah. And what it is, the first murder usually takes place 90% of the times, but based on experience. The first murder takes place close to where the marauder lives.
Got you.
If you put the zone of where this guy most likely lived, which includes Collingwood Street, includes the area where the first victim was killed, Martha Tabram.
Right.
So using modern police methods, you can kind of like really tighten up on your
pinpoint where he is.
case. Yeah. But the thing is, this Ed Norris, right? Another modern thing that police like to do is, e-fits. So do you know they do it a lot with Madeleine McCann? They take her as a young child and they kind of age her on a computer.
Yeah.
They increase her age on a computer. But what they did is they did it with James Kelly. They did it in reverse, because when he went back to Broadmoor after his killing spree, they took a photo of him. And so you got the photo, which is this, that one there. That's Jack the Ripper. That's him in old age. So what they did was they took that photo and they de-aged it. They made him younger, right? And they did all this on computer graphics. So here is a photo of James Kelly as he would have looked during the age he was when the Ripper killings took place. So that's it. That's him as an elderly man.
Yep.
That is him as a man in his 20s.
Shit.
Right? Just take a look at that. Who does that look like? Who does that look like?
The E-fit.
Yeah, that's that.
In E-fit.
There you go. Jack the Ripper and James Kelly right next to each other.
It's so weird, because in the actual picture of James Kelly, he's got random features. But
this one
obviously, I
don't know if you can see some similarity between those two, but
I mean, E-fits are not. They're not going to be absolutely spot on.
No, of course.
They're rough, aren't they?
Of course,
There's quite a funny case that I watched on Lieutenant Joe Kender, the homicide hunter, and there was a little gay guy that had spotted someone that this geezer blew up a bank. Basically, a bank had been blown up, and the one person that came forward to give him an E-fit gave him the E-fit of a geezer with bog eyes, big fucking bog eyes, and an alien-shaped head. Right, so they sort of looked at it, they were like,
come on,
we've got to put this out. We have to put this out, even though we think it's bullshit. When they caught the geezer years later, they couldn't believe their eyes when they knocked at the door. They figured out who it was. He opened the door and he had this big head and these fucking bog eyes.
No.
And they were like, no fucking way. Really? And honestly,
because they're thinking it's like if you ask your daughter, your 8-year-old daughter to draw you, and it's like,
that's what I mean. He was this little camp geezer that came forward and said, I saw him. He had this big head, and he made the artist, sketch artist, go through and do it all again. He was like, no, that's not him. Trust me. Bigger head, bigger forehead, bigger forehead. Yep, that's him. They actually thought it was a guy in a mask. They were like, he must have been wearing a mask. He must have been wearing a mask. Like, he must have disguised himself. But when they added up all the evidence, it turned out that the bank had sent bailiffs to his door on the day of his son's funeral. To collect his car that he'd crashed in and killed himself because he hadn't made payments on it. And he lost his temper with them. He was like, them fucking dirty, but fucking sending.
Yeah, he wanted payback. Yeah.
The bailiff didn't know. He was like, I am so sorry. Like, Jesus, I've been sent here by the bank. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. He took revenge on the bank, blew it up, didn't take any money. There was no money missing. There was just a big explosion. They thought it's a robbery, clearly a robbery. Turned up, there's no money missing. Nothing's happened. They've just blown up the fucking money. Yeah. What is this about? Managed to figure out where he got the dynamite from, where, he would have been someone that worked with dynamite, so he must have been a miner in Colorado. They added it all up, and it turned up at the door, and it's this geezer with his alien head and these eyes. He's such a peculiar looking man. They were like, we've got him. Like, I can't believe this. We thought he was fucking around. He was just some UFO freak. They get all sorts of
people in the chat are saying that you should have been a policeman, Paul.
I prefer to be on this side of the fence, fighting for Queen and country.
He's got the personality for someone that's thorough. wants things done properly. He's very, it's got to be. I need it all. No, that's not enough. You're one of them guys, man. You are pinpoint accuracy.
I've got to say, you've built up a convincing story. You've definitely built up. Yeah, this is definitely the most likely guy, I think, as well, from what you've told me. So.
You know, look at all the circumstantial evidence that I've just provided. Whether it's the e-fits, the appearances, the connection between his wife's murder and the first murder, and where he says he was during the events, and so on and so forth. It's almost an ironclad circumstantial case against this man for being Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
And and what if you take all of that? That is far superior. All of that, what we've just mentioned, all that we've just gone through, far superior to any other potential suspect for Jack the Ripper. I've heard
Polax. I've heard it was H.H. Holmes. I heard it was royalty. I heard it was some police chief. That's why he got away with it, because he had, everyone to cover up for him, which I found hard to believe. It's like, what, you think the whole fucking station is just going to back you on that shit, bro? No.
Oh, I've just remembered something, right?
Yeah, cool.
This guy's called James Kelly. The one of the victims was called Mary Kelly, the one that was completely eviscerated, right?
Yeah.
I just remembered something. Something's just sprung to me. There's a lot of information you have to remember.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
So after Mary Kelly was eviscerated in Dorset Street, right, in the heart of Whitechapel, what did the police do? The police got together, right, and they went to. Do you remember I told you he killed his wife and he was living near King's Cross, right, just the other side of Shoreditch? I can't remember what the road was called. After Mary Kelly was killed, so you talk about the sixth victim here, right? Or the fifth or the fourth, whatever way you look at it. After Mary Kelly was killed, the similarity in names between Mary Kelly and James Kelly, it must have had a light bulb moment at Scotland Yard, because someone must have said, isn't there an escaped murderer from Broadmoor on the loose in Whitechapel called James Kelly? I think the murder of Mary Kelly made a light bulb go on, made something click somewhere in Scotland Yard, because the first thing the police did after the murder of Mary Kelly was go to his last known address and raid it in force, looking for him.
I did actually think that when you said his name was Kelly, and then you said, does that like ring a bell? I was kind of like, is that what you meant? But I just didn't want to sound like but that's... Yeah.
A popular Irish name back then.
And I was thinking, and there's that, and I was just thinking, there's no chance. But freaking hell, they actually raided his house, though.
Yeah, literally 2 days after the murder of Mary Kelly, which is sometimes accredited as being the last one in Whitechapel, the worst one and the last one. 2 days later, the police go en masse to his last known address and kick the doors off the hinges looking for him. And that's another significant plank of evidence that they must have thought that this guy was so significant. And they only really did it after the murder of Mary Kelly. Because what I think is in normal times, an escaped mental patient murderer from Broadmoor would have attracted a lot of attention. But
I was thinking this, why wouldn't they have gone and locked him up first? But was they just stretched out? They couldn't. They knew sort of where he was.
Much harder to attract people back then.
Yeah.
It ain't like it is today, where you go on their Facebook and you say, that cunt's at Nando's, we're going to go and get him now.
Yeah.
It was.
Plus, the police forces of Southeast England were stripped bare and all sent to Whitechapel because of the Jack the Ripper crisis. Yeah. So they kind of just, although he's escaped and he was a murderer and he's mentally ill, they kind of just forgot about him for the moment.
He was sort of low priority, yeah.
Yeah, because they were busy dealing with Jack the Ripper. But after the murder of Mary Kelly, someone must have thought, hold on a minute, this guy comes from this area and he killed his wife and he escaped from Broadmoor and he's in Whitechapel, he comes from East London. And they must have thought, bloody, he might be the one we're looking for. So they go and kick off the doors at his last known address. But obviously all they found there was the grieving family of the wife that he had killed, that he was living with. But it's very significant. No one else. There was hundreds of arrests for the during the Jack the Ripper crisis, but this was the only one where that specifically followed up on a lead and went and kicked off the front door and arrested him. The rest of them were just, oh, he looks a bit dodgy. You know, knocked on a front door in Whitechapel. You look a bit dodgy, mate. Come down the station. You know, they deliberately went looking for this guy at the height of the Jack the Ripper crisis. What does that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, that's significant because he obviously wasn't a well-known dude anyway. And a lot of the people they were looking into was just people. I reckon it was him. He's fucking weird. He touched me up. He didn't pay me last time he had business off me. You know, prostitutes were grassing up people that, you know, and were putting it on people that had not paid them for service, you know, and things like that. They were dealing with a lot of that, and they were dealing with a lot of people saying, I reckon it's him because he's a weirdo. I reckon it's him because he's a butcher. I reckon it's him because he's a barber. I reckon it's him because he's a surgeon. They went through so many potential.
Here you have a guy, right? Just to summarise, here you have a guy who killed his wife in the same way that the first Jack the Ripper victim died, right? Yeah. Stabbed in the neck. Here you have a guy who hates prostitutes and blamed prostitutes for wrecking his life, basically, wrecking his marriage. So he hated prostitutes. There was a connection between the way he killed his wife and the first victim. He talked when he was in Broadmoor about some kind of divine mission of retribution. What could that have meant? Maybe he meant, well, these prostitutes have ruined my life. I wonder how many lives they're ruining. I'm going to go and kill them all for God. And
Mummy, what you did come from a broken home, so probably.
I can't remember the specifics, but if you read this book, then you get it gives you the details of it. I think his mother was quite loose-moraled as well. So that you add that into the mix. But here's a guy who actually was in Whitechapel during the Autumn of Terror. He actually escaped about 4 or 5 months before the first Jack the Ripper victim. So you think, what was he doing in 4 or 5 months? And what if you look at it logically, if you just escaped from a mental hospital and you had nothing, and I may read nothing to your name apart from the clothes that you have on, and you arrive in Whitechapel, what's your first concern? Not going out killing victims. Your first concern is getting somewhere to live or getting somewhere to work, getting food, get basically getting yourself set up. And I think once he was set up and he had money and he had a job and he had a home or somewhere to live, I believe that's when 4 or 5 months later, he started going out and killing victims.
Yeah. So he built up his confidence, yeah.
And not only that, they turned to this, didn't they? It was on the whiskey, they was on the gin, they was on all sorts, and it would, you know, what's the first thing you do when you've had a few drinks? You want to go and get your end away, you know, as they say, you know, fucking.
But here, again, you have a guy who hates prostitutes, killed his wife the same way as the first victim was killed, talked about a divine mission of retribution and revenge against prostitutes, and here's a guy who said he was on the warpath when he escaped. He was on the warpath against Skank. Skank meaning... what... and then you have the physical appearances, and then you have his confession. The Ripper killings in America seem to shadow where he was. So you're looking at the face. I'll put it up again, but this guy... This is... and I've studied this for 4 years, Luke. I mean, intensely. This guy... I believe it's 90% certain this guy was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
And you could see in his face, he looks like an evil.
How tall was he, Paul? What was his frame? What was his?
About 5'6", which according to the eyewitness statements is about the right height.
About right, about 5'5" to 5'8", they were saying.
Yeah, because Elizabeth Long outside 29 Hanbury Street said that he was just a bit taller than Annie Chapman. Annie Chapman was 5'4".
Mm-hmm.
So he was 5'5", 6'7", something like that. So he would have been just a bit taller. So it all makes sense. We're looking at it without any forensics, DNA or CCTV or anything really, but what you're looking at here is a massive circumstantial case against this man, and it just makes sense. And the police must have thought so because they went looking for him after the last murder. And the fact that they kicked off, this is another thing you need to consider as well. After the murder of Mary Kelly, 2 days later, they went and kicked off his front door where he used to live. He might have learnt about that and thought, bugger, the police are on to me. That, you know what I'll do? I'll cross into France. I'll go to Rotterdam, get on the Zamdam cruise liner, and I'll piss off to America to evade capture.
The dots add up, mate. The dots add up. That's like, if he isn't, then Jesus Christ, what are the chances? And I don't, I'm not one to believe in coincidence either.
Well, everything what I've just said, the alternative is everything I've just said, all those coincidences and all those strands of evidence are just complete nonsense, which is hard to believe, really.
It doesn't make sense if that's not the case, then how does that, It can't be. It can't be that he was in all them places in America where there was a brutal murder as well, which is... that's
a bit loose. That's a lot looser, but...
But it's not, though, is it?
Because if you put the whole picture together, everything I've said, then it looks very likely. You can't say for certain. We can't, because it's 130 years ago, but it looks very likely that this guy was Jack the Ripper.
If he isn't Jack the Ripper, then that shit is...
fantastical coincidences, yeah.
I mean, it's a lottery win, yeah? That he's not.
Yeah.
Like that's how you can narrow that down with all that added together, with the profession, his access to the broken home element, because serial killers how rare is it to get a serial killer that isn't from a broken home? I mean, Ted Bundy's the only one that springs to mind that didn't come from. He was a complete anomaly.
What about the H.H. Holmes thing? Yeah, that's complete rubbish as well.
I've looked. The way I look at it, right?
Maybe.
The way I look at it is you have to test all the other suspects against the avalanche of circumstantial evidence and likelihood I've just presented. And when you do that, you think, bloody hell, you can literally write off 99% of other suspects.
Yeah.
There's only one other suspect that actually pricks my fancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his name was Charles Lechmere. There's actually, I'll provide you with the documentary, Luke. He was actually the man who discovered Polly Nichols, and he was found alone, standing over the body. And in the Ripper story, they credit him with having discovered the body. However, after he was found with the body, see Polly Nichols, unlike the other victims who were left on public display, Polly Nichols had her dress pulled down again to cover up what had been done to her. They only found out what had been done to her back in the morning. So that's very suspicious. Why would he pull that down to cover it? Well, it would make sense if the guy who was found with her body noticed someone else coming along, got caught in the act and pulled it down. So
or he was just trying to give us some dignity.
There is that.
I mean, if
which is what the police thought as well, right?
Yeah, the police thought that. Yeah, they covered it. They pulled it down to maintain her dignity.
Yeah,
and that's it was likely in those days, that you would.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know people that have done it, and I've done it myself with my coat. A woman got run over by a bus, and it actually tore her jeans off of her arse.
Yeah.
Being totally honest, I think if I'd done that, I would do the same. I think.
I put my
I'd like to believe so. Yeah.
She was alive. She lived. She was fine after that. But I put my Parker jacket over her arse because the wheels had gone over her and it had torn her jeans from her arse and it was all hanging out. And I was like, look, stay there, love. Don't fucking move. She was still trying to move. She was in complete shock. But I covered her, as maybe he did that.
Yeah,
maybe.
I would like to believe that a lot of people would do that. So that's kind of like, but still continue, yeah.
But that's Paul's right though. That's
But there's two things. If people are interested in this subject and they want to follow up on what I've said, then go and buy this book. You can't see it.
Prisoner 1167, because there's not a face on it. It doesn't pick up. It only picks
up. I know. Yeah. But
Yeah,
Prisoner 1167, The Madman Who Was Jack the Ripper by James Tully. And it's a big book, it's a big work on everything I've spoken about. And if you combine that with the research that Ed Norris did, the cold case detective from the NYPD, who basically filled in all the blanks and did the rest. If you combine those two, you basically get all of the stuff what I've summarized briefly tonight. If you actually read and go into detail with Ed Norris and James Tully, you'll get a lot more detail, which will make you even more convinced. I'm not here for a 4-hour session to go over every detail. I've given the broad brushstrokes. And there's also what I was talking about, Ed Norris, the cold case detective at the NYPD. There's a documentary on YouTube that he did about Jack the Ripper. It's called Jack the Ripper in America. Simple as that.
Yeah.
You can Google that and watch it. And he basically goes over everything that I've done, but it's more of a documentary, and he goes on a journey. It starts off not even knowing who James Kelly is, and he ends up identifying him. And the thing is, like, no one knew anything about James Kelly until the 90s. So you think, why did over 100 years pass without no one knowing about it? Because what I think happened is, and this explained in James Tully's book, is that after the murder of Mary Kelly, they went and kicked his door off and went looking for him. And I think the penny dropped. You got to understand what it was a frenzy. It was an international publicity bonanza, the Jack the Ripper crisis.
Selling papers like no man.
Yeah, it nearly brought down the government. You know, it nearly brought down the government at one point. And what I think they realised, I think they sat there and in Scotland Yard and thought, you know what? We should have been looking for the escaped madman who killed his wife, James Kelly. But if you were the top policeman now, we realised we'd made such a massive such a massive mistake by not looking for James Kelly, who only recently escaped from Broadmoor and come back to East London. Why didn't they look for him? Oh shit, we've made a massive mistake here, guys. Let's cover it up.
Yeah,
So
maybe. It's not unheard of.
Let me finish, Luke. Let me finish. What they did was they sealed James Kelly's Broadmoor files until the 1990s.
No.
James Tully went and picked them all up and wrote a book about it.
I'm sold.
As soon as you said that, I'm sold. That's
so. There is a conspiracy element to this as well. That is madness.
Listen, there's hundreds of patients who've been in and out of Broadmoor. Why haven't hardly any of their files been sealed for 100 years? The reason they were sealed for 100.
Yeah, that's insane.
Sometime in the 90s, I think it was. Yeah. So all of this, do you remember I said that James Kelly wrote a confession where he said, I'd been to America, I'd been on the warpath, I've been dealing with skank, all that kind of stuff. That was sealed until the 1990s, along with all the other stuff.
Sounds like he says skank a lot. He says...
No, I'm bought. I'm seriously,
Impossible. It was impossible because of the duplicity of the state. It was impossible to find out about this guy until everyone who's involved made the mistakes was dead and long gone and dead. Because they sealed all his files.
What are me, you, and Luke going to do right now about it? We're going to go down there, you should have told us, like... No,
exactly.
And that's why they do stuff like that. I mean...
Exactly.
What was it? The 9/11 files wasn't released until fucking Bush was well out of office, and they do these corrupt fucking things.
Yeah, it's like all their grandkids or related family and all that. They're not caring no more. Like it's all done and dusted. But yeah, that does actually make sense.
Yeah, I swear the John F. Kennedy files wasn't released until recently.
Yeah, they've done it with a lot of stuff.
It's so many.
Gentlemen, I hope that...
Yes.
You introduced me as a ripperologist, and a ripperologist apparently is anyone who takes a keen interest in this subject. So I hope that I hope it's been entertaining this evening, hearing my theories on the greatest international crime mystery of all time.
Well, I think you've convinced a lot of people tonight. I do.
Not only that, you've showed everyone that you have layers to yourself, mate. You're actually a genuinely intelligent guy. You're not what they make out on the media. I'm not having any of that fucking crap. I never did. I've took you as you've come, and you have entertained my people in here tonight like massively. Don't forget, he's got a book out himself. I actually own it. Battle for Britain by Paul Golding. He's an author, a ripperologist, a patriot, and an all-round good guy and a friend of mine for life, mate. I'm telling you now. Just fucking thank you so much for doing this for us tonight. It's.
I wish I had the time. If I had the time, if I weren't running Britain First 24/7, I'd sit down. I'd spend a year writing a book on all this.
Yeah, mate.
Combining everything into one word.
You ever get the chance and you need the holiday, please do it, because I'm sold now. That was it. Especially the nail in the coffin for me was when you said they covered it up for 90. I was like,
that's it, because I am a conspiracy guy myself. So I was like, right, there's a good reason for it. So.
In the book, this is obviously the front page. In the book, it explains in detail the cover up. And why, and so on. So I definitely think get that book. Before we end, I'd just like to give a shout out to my fellow ripperologist, Jeff Miles, who I know is listening. He's the regional organizer for the Eastern region for Britain First. And me and him have been bouncing off each other for a long, long time about Jack the Ripper, because he's just as keen about the subject as I am. So a big shout out to Jeff Miles.
Yeah, hello to Jeff as well. I've met him before as well. He's a good guy, really good guy. And Sam, Big Sam in the audience.
Big Sam loves the Jack the Ripper tours as well. Yeah. I must admit, Big Sam, yeah.
He's my boy.
Every time he comes over, he wants to go over and get another Ripper tour. So yeah, but big shout out to Sam Cochran from Belfast and Jeff Miles. They're my ripperologist buddies within Britain First.
Oh, that's cool.
Trust me, people. Check out Britain First. They're on Telegram. Are you on Facebook? Are you allowed on there?
No.
Of course he's not.
No, definitely not. We were banned, weren't we? We were
Talk too much
banned.
Truth, mate.
In fact, if you there's actually Facebook uses facial recognition software to do moderating. So if you put up my face or Tommy Robinson's face on Facebook, it will get taken down. That's how strict the ban is on people like us. You can't
free speech. It's an American company, and they're restricting free speech. Come on, man. Oh fuck. What's going on? Their
argument is it's a private company; they could do what they want. It's like, yeah, but you still have to operate under the Constitution.
They should. America, you need to get hold of yourselves, man. And so do we. Me and Luke are pushing for free speech as well. In our country, we want that big time.
It's our whole shtick.
But I've plugged your book, Paul, as well. I've plugged your book. I've plugged all the books you spoke of as well. People can get them on Amazon and the links I've shared.
You're a big profile, you know what I mean? And giving us your time is fucking means the world to me. And not only that, it was such an interesting subject. Like, honestly, we haven't stopped talking, and I reckon I've got another 4 hours in me, which I don't think the audience have. But like,
I don't think my bladder can wait another 4 hours.
No, mate, yeah.
But no, when the lockdowns ended and things have lightened up a bit, I'll take both of you on a full-blown Jack the Ripper tour of Whitechapel. And it's better than anything you can pay in the East End. I promise you that.
I'd absolutely love that, mate. I'll hold you to that. Seriously, I'd love to.
Our pleasure.
I love serial killers and all that shit. Like, I'm not a specific ripperologist. I like them. I like the whole genre. And I've been schooled tonight, like, for real. I was like, nah, is that? Oh fuck yeah! Like, you've given me loads of shit. I've got to go and look up.
Well, look, at the very minimum, if you don't buy the book, just go and watch the documentary on YouTube of Ed Morris, Jack the Ripper in America. Go and watch that, and that's got a lot of...
I shared the IMDb of that as well. I'll quickly do it again so people know.
No, I really appreciate it, mate. Thank you for your time, Paul.
And anytime.
As soon as this shit's over, we'll hook up and
we'll hit Whitechapel.
Well, that would be a laugh. That would be a proper bubble. I'm
public enemy #1 in Whitechapel because of the, we've almost caused riots in Whitechapel before, many occasions. Brick Lane, East London Mosque. We've been, So, but I love going around there because at the end of the day, that is still England. It's still English turf, soil.
Yeah, we have every right. We all have every right to go there. It's a joke that
we'll expect a little tussle, but whatever. Fuck them. It is what it is. You know what I mean? We'll have Big Sam with us anyway. He could take on about 12 geese.
Yeah, Big Sam would definitely be up for it. So will Jeff. Jeff Miles will be definitely up for it. So we'll have a full car. And we'll bring Ashley along. She can have about a 10th Jack the Ripper tour.
Oh, we don't need security.
She's gonna love it.
Good stuff. All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, nice to meet you virtually. Shake your hand virtually as well.
I'll see you soon in Whitechapel.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Definitely. Right. Thanks for coming on.
Good night, gentlemen. Bye bye.
Appreciate it. See you later.
Thanks.